The auction had already started by the time she walked in. Not fashionably late, actually late. The kind of late where the bidding paddle in her hand was still warm from the registration desk, and the woman at the door gave her a look that said, "This is a black tie event, not a market." Zara adjusted her gold earring, smoothed the front of her emerald dress, and walked in anyway. The Kona Foundation Charity Gala was Seoul's most deliberately boring event of the year. A room full of old money deciding which causes deserved their guilt. The kind of evening where men in medals stood with men in suits, and both pretended the difference between them wasn't everything. Crystal glasses, string quartet, the specific silence of people performing restraint. Zara had been sent to cover it for the arts foundation she worked for back in Lagos. 3 days in Seoul, 1 event, 1 write-up. Simple. Except nothing about the room was simple. She found a spot near the back, paddle resting against her thigh, and scanned the program. Lot 7, a sculpture by a Senegalese artist she actually admired. She'd bid on that. Maybe Lot 12 if the evening got interesting. It did not get interesting. Until the general walked in. She didn't know he was a general yet. She knew only that the room changed when he entered. Not loudly, not with announcements or applause, but in the way a room changes when barometric pressure drops before a storm. Conversations shortened, posture adjusted. A cluster of men near the podium physically turned, like weather vanes finding north. He was tall. Not dramatically so, but tall in the way that meant he was used to seeing over things. Rooms, crowds, plans. His uniform was dark, decorated but not ostentatious. Each medal placed like punctuation rather than decoration. His face was cut clean. Still. The particular stillness of a man who had learned long ago that any expression he made in public would be read, cataloged, and used. He looked around the room once, not searching for anyone, just taking inventory. Zara looked back at her program. Lot 6, marble figurine, estimated value 4.2 million won. She didn't care about marble figurines. She looked up again. He was looking at her.
Not the looking across a room glance that people do at events when their eyes land somewhere and bounce off. He was looking at her, directly, with the full weight of a man who did not waste attention. Zara held it. 3 seconds. 4. She raised her paddle in a small, deliberate wave. The kind that could mean hello, or I see you looking, or yes, I know. And something moved in his face. Not a smile. The ghost of a reaction that hadn't decided yet what it wanted to be. Then the auctioneer called Lot 6, and the moment dissolved. She forgot about him for 40 minutes. Lot 7 came up, and she bid, cleanly, without theater, and won the Senegalese sculpture for just under her limit. She was writing down the collection details when she became aware of someone standing beside her. Not crowding, just present. She turned. Up close, he was more difficult to read. The stillness was the same, but there was something underneath it now. Something that hadn't been there when he was standing across the room being surveyed by the whole event. "You bid with your left hand," he said. His Korean was precise, low, the kind of voice that did not need volume to carry. Zara blinked. "I'm left-handed." Most people hold the paddle in their dominant hand and hesitate before raising it. He glanced at where her paddle now rested against her hip. "You didn't hesitate." She looked at him for a moment. "Is that relevant to something, General Cha?" His jaw tightened slightly, as if the name cost him something. "Cha Junho." She had not heard that name before, but she clocked the way 3 men within earshot suddenly found other directions to look, and understood that she probably should have. "Zara Mensah," I said, and I didn't hesitate because I already knew what I wanted. "The Senegalese piece." "You were watching the bidding?" "I was watching you watch the bidding. A beat. There's a difference." She should have found that unsettling. Instead, something in her chest tilted, just slightly, the way a compass needle moves before it settles on a direction.
Most men don't announce that they've been watching, she said. Most men are afraid of what women do with the information. She laughed. She hadn't expected to. The sound came out clean and unguarded, and she watched it land on him like something he'd forgotten the shape of. His breath changed, barely perceptible, a door opening 1 centimeter. "You're not afraid," she said. "Not of that." He looked at her steadily. "Not of you knowing." The auctioneer's voice swelled over the room. "Lot 8. Zara didn't move. Neither did he. "What are you afraid of, General Cha?" she asked. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "That's a second conversation question," he said finally. "We're not having a second conversation. I'm in Seoul for 3 days." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not alarm. The opposite. A kind of sharpening. The way a man looks when a problem he thought was straightforward reveals itself to be interesting. "Then you should eat dinner before you leave," he said. "There's a restaurant on the 43rd floor of the building across the street. The view is worth your time." Zara tilted her head. "Is that a recommendation or an invitation?" He held her gaze. "Whichever one you'll say yes to." She said yes to neither. She collected her sculpture, thanked the foundation coordinator, and took a car back to her hotel. She changed out of the emerald dress. She ordered room service, jollof rice, improbably good for Seoul, and sat by the window eating it while the city pressed its lights against the glass. She thought about the way he'd looked at her, not the initial surveillance from across the room, but after, when she laughed, when the stillness in him cracked open, just that 1 centimeter, and something underneath it looked out. Zara had spent a decade around powerful men. She knew what it looked like when they wanted something and were used to getting it. The reaching, the performing, the careful construction of inevitability. Cha Junho had not done any of that. He had simply told her the truth. "I was watching you, not the room," and then left the door open. She pushed the rice around her plate. 43rd floor, view worth your time. She knew the building. She'd walked past it twice that afternoon. She looked at the time. 11:43. She looked at the city. She finished the rice. She put on her coat. He was already there. Not waiting. That was the thing. He was standing at the window with a glass of something dark, looking out at the city the way she imagined he looked at maps, as if he were calculating distances between things. She watched him for a moment from the entrance, before he sensed her. And he did sense her, his head turning before her heels made a sound on the floor, and turned. He looked at her the same way he had at the gala. Full, present. The kind of looking that most people had trained themselves out of because it gave too much away. "You came," he said. "You said the view was worth it." He glanced toward the window. 43 floors of Seoul spread below them, brilliant and indifferent. "And?" She walked to the glass and stood beside him.
close enough that she could see their reflections overlapping in it. Her coat, his uniform, jacket removed now, sleeves rolled to the forearm. "You were right," she said. He felt him look at her reflection rather than her face. His jaw tightened the way it had when he said his name, like something being contained. "How long have you been a general?" she asked. 12 years. "You're young for it." "I was motivated." She looked at his reflection. "By what?" A pause. Outside, a plane crossed the city's edge, its lights blinking slow and steady. "By the specific fear," he said quietly, "of becoming someone who was never afraid of anything." Zara turned to look at him directly. He was already looking at her. The air in the room felt different suddenly, thickened by something neither of them had named yet. She could hear her own pulse. She thought, absurdly, of the way a sculpture looks just before you touch it, when you already know the surface will be cold and you're going anyway. "That's a strange thing for a general to fear," she said. "It's a very sane thing," he said, "for a man." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked back at the city, and he looked back at the city, and they stood there in the particular silence of two people who have just understood something about each other that neither of them intended to reveal. Below them, Sol moved on, oblivious. Neither of them noticed the man at the bar, face angled carefully away, phone held low, camera facing them. Neither of them knew what was coming. The photo went live at 6 a.m. Zara was still asleep when it happened, her phone on the nightstand, face down, vibrating with the particular persistence of something that wasn't going to stop. She ignored it twice. The third time she picked it up. 41 notifications. She sat up. The headline was in Korean, but the translation app rendered it in 4 seconds flat. General Cha's secret. Who is the foreign woman? The photo was clear, 43 floors up, the city blazing behind them, her reflection and his overlapping in the glass, his head turned toward her, her face tilted up at him. The angle made it look like something it wasn't, or maybe like exactly what it was, which was somehow worse. She stared at the screen. Then her work phone rang. Her director in Lagos, voice tight before Zara could say a word. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like." "It's not what it looks like." "Then what is it?" Zara opened her mouth, closed it. "It's a view," she said finally. 43 floors, the city. A long silence from Lagos. "Zara, is that General Cha Junho?" "We met at the gala last night. Briefly." "He's not briefly. He commands the 1st Operations Corps. He's being considered for Joint Chiefs. He has enemies the size of small governments, and you are now on a photograph with him that is currently trending in 3 countries. Her director exhaled. "Come home. Today. Get on a plane." "I will. My flight's this afternoon." She hung up, opened the photo again. Someone had been in that restaurant. Someone had waited, had the angle, had uploaded it before either of them had left the building. This wasn't opportunistic. Someone had known he would be there. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown Korean number. She almost didn't answer. "Miss Mensa." The voice was male, official, flat. "This is Lieutenant Bae, Office of General Cha Junho. The General requests that you do not leave your hotel until you hear from us." Zara stood up very slowly. "Excuse me?"
"There have been developments. For your safety." "I have a flight this afternoon." A pause. "We are aware. Please stay in your room." The line went dead. Zara stood in the middle of her hotel room in Seoul at 6:15 in the morning, phone in hand, emerald dress still draped over the chair where she'd left it the night before. Outside, the city was already moving, already loud, already indifferent. She looked at her suitcase. She thought about packing it. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unsaved number. 2 words. "Don't leave." She knew the handwriting wasn't his. It was a text. But she knew it was him. The terseness of it. The assumption that 2 words were sufficient. She sat back down on the bed. "Don't leave," she repeated out loud, to no one. Outside, the city kept moving. Somewhere in it, a general was already at war. And Zara Mensah, who had come to Seoul for 3 days and a sculpture and a write-up, was beginning to understand that she was no longer a visitor.
She was a variable in someone else's equation. He arrived at her hotel at 7:45 with no announcement and 2 men who waited in the corridor without being asked. Zara had dressed, not because she'd been told to, but because she refused to have whatever this conversation was in pajamas. Dark jeans, white shirt, her braids pulled back. She opened the door before he knocked. She'd heard the elevator and stepped back to let him in. He looked like he hadn't slept. Not disheveled. The uniform was pressed, the bearing was exact. But there was something around his eyes that hadn't been there at the restaurant. A tightness. The specific exhaustion of a man who had been managing a crisis since before dawn. "I'm sorry," he said. It was the last thing she'd expected him to say. "Tell me what's happening," she said. He moved to the window. Old habit she was already learning. When he needed to think, he found a view. The photo was taken by an operative connected to General Park Moo-jin. He's my primary political opponent for the Joint Chiefs nomination. His method is disruption. He looks for pressure points and applies them publicly before the other person can respond. And I'm a pressure point. You are now, he turned. He's filed an inquiry with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs suggesting that your presence at the gala was non-incidental, that the foundation you work for has ties to foreign intelligence interests, that your interaction with me was... He stopped. Manufactured, Zara finished. Engineered. His jaw tightened. It's not an accusation that will hold. The foundation's records are clean, your credentials are clean. But the process of clearing it takes time, and while it's in process, your passport will be flagged at departure. If you board a flight today, it creates the appearance of flight, which strengthens his narrative. Zara sat down on the edge of the bed. The room felt very small suddenly. How long? 4 days, possibly 5. My legal team is already moving. She looked at him. And if I refuse? If I go to the airport anyway and make a scene and call the Lagos embassy and do this loudly and publicly? Then Park Moo-jin has footage of a foreign national connected to me resisting detainment, and he uses it. He held her gaze steadily. I'm not asking you to accept this quietly for my sake, Zara. I'm asking you because going loudly makes your situation worse, not better. The use of his name, first name, no title, landed differently than it should have.
She looked at the window, at the city beyond it. You said your enemies are the size of small governments, she said. Someone told me that this morning. Accurate. And last night, you knew this man was your opponent. You knew the gala was watched. She turned back to him. You still talk to me. Something moved across his face. Not guilt. More complicated than guilt. I did, he said. Why? He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a man deciding how much truth is the right amount. Because you waved at me, he said. "With your paddle. Across a room full of people performing invisibility, you looked directly at me and waved."
He paused. I haven't been looked at like a person in a very long time. Zara held that. Outside, a bus passed. A horn somewhere below. The city doing what cities do. Turning without pausing for the small catastrophes happening inside its buildings. 4 days, she said. 4 days. She exhaled slowly. "I need a workspace. A real desk, not this thing." She gestured at the hotel writing table. "I have 3 reports overdue and a board presentation, and I did not come to Seoul to sit in a hotel room watching the news cycle." For the first time since he'd walked in, the tightness around his eyes eased. Not a smile, not quite, but something adjacent to relief. "I can arrange that. And I need proper food. Not hotel food. Real food. Also manageable. And General Cha."
She met his eyes. "When this is over and my passport is cleared and I go home, this," she gestured between them, "whatever this almost was, it ends here. I have a life in Lagos. You have a war in Seoul. We don't pretend otherwise." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Agreed," he said. Neither of them believed it. The workspace he arranged was an office on the 14th floor of a building his foundation owned, 3 blocks from the hotel. Real desk, fast internet, floor-to-ceiling windows facing south. A woman named Jisoo who appeared each morning with coffee and disappeared without conversation, which Zara immediately appreciated. Day 2. She worked. She answered emails. She filed her gala report, which contained no mention of generals or 43-floor restaurants or flagged passports. She spoke to her director twice, the second call shorter than the first, the alarm in Lagos quieting as Zara's tone remained steady and professional. She was fine. She was handling it. She would be home by the weekend. Junho came by at noon.
Not announced, not dramatically. He simply appeared in the doorway with 2 containers of food from somewhere that smelled extraordinary and said, "You said real food," and put them on the desk. Zara looked up from her laptop. He'd changed out of uniform. Dark trousers, a gray shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Without the medals and the shoulders and the full architectural weight of the uniform, he looked like someone she might have met at a dinner party, like someone whose last name she might not have known. She wasn't sure which version of him was more dangerous. "Sit," she said. He sat. They ate in a silence that should have been awkward and wasn't. Outside the window, Seoul performed its usual miracle of organized chaos. Inside, 2 people who had agreed this was nothing ate lunch like it was something. "Tell me about Lagos," he said. She looked at him. "Why?" "Because you know what Seoul looks like from 43 floors, and I know nothing about where you come from." Zara considered that. Then she told him. Not the tourism version, not the diplomatic version, but the real one. The heat that arrived in March and stayed until November. The traffic that was less a system than a negotiation. The way the city smelled after rain, which was like nothing else on earth. The foundation she worked for, the artists they supported. The specific joy of watching someone's work reach an audience that hadn't known it needed them. He listened the way he had at the restaurant, fully, without interrupting, with the focused attention of a man accustomed to briefings, who had, apparently, decided she was more interesting than anything he'd been briefed on lately.
"You love it," he said when she finished.
You didn't hesitate. Why would I? He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands. I was posted in 5 cities before Seoul. I learned the roads and the restaurants and the faces I needed to know. I never learned the smell after rain. That's a sad way to live, she said. It's an efficient one. Efficient and alive aren't the same thing. She met his eyes. You said last night you were afraid of becoming someone who was never afraid. That's the same fear. Being efficient at a life instead of living it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, quietly, you say things most people spend years building to. I'm from Lagos. We don't have time for slow arrivals. That sound again, the one she'd heard at the gala, the one that had cracked open that centimeter. He laughed, low, real, surprised by itself. Zara felt it move through her like weather. Stop, she told herself. 4 days, then home. Day 3 arrived with bad news. Lieutenant Bay called at 7 a.m. with the voice he used when the news was worse than expected. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs inquiry had expanded. Park Moo-jin had submitted supplementary documentation. Fabricated, Junho's legal team was certain, but sophisticated enough to require formal rebuttal. The timeline had shifted. Not 4 days. 7. Possibly 10. Zara sat with the phone against her ear and looked at the city, and felt for the first time since this started, the specific weight of being stuck somewhere you didn't choose. Then she called her director and said the words she hadn't planned to say. I need 2 more weeks. Zara, paid leave, starting today. Personal reasons. She kept her voice clean, professional.
She kept her voice clean, professional, giving nothing. I'll have everything filed before end of business. A long pause from Lagos. Is this about the general? It's about finishing what I started, she said, which was true, if not complete. She hung up, opened her laptop. She had not expected to be here this long. She had not packed for it. She had not prepared for the particular slow erosion of a resolve you were certain about. That afternoon, Junho took her to a part of Seoul she hadn't seen. Not the gala circuit, not the 43-floor restaurants, but older streets, narrower, where the buildings remembered what they were before the glass towers came. A market she could smell from the corner. A grandmother selling flowers, who looked at Junho and then at Zara, and said something in Korean that made Jisoo, who had inexplicably come along, cover her mouth. What did she say? Zara asked.
Jisoo looked at the ceiling. She said he looks at you the way her husband used to look at her. Zara didn't look at Junho. Junho said nothing. They walked further down the street and did not talk about it. But Zara noticed, she couldn't help noticing, the way he moved differently here. Not the controlled stillness of the gala or the strategic composure of the hotel conversation. Here he moved like a man who had once known this city before it knew him. He stopped at a stall and picked up a small ceramic bowl and turned it over in his hands with a familiarity that had nothing to do with power. You grew up near here, she said, not a question. He set the bowl down. 2 streets over. What was it like? He looked down the market, past the stall.
Loud, he said. My mother cooked with every window open. You could smell the whole neighborhood in our kitchen." He paused. "She died when I was 19. I moved into the barracks that year, and I don't think I've stood still long enough to smell anything since." Zara didn't say she was sorry. She'd noticed at the restaurant that he didn't want condolences. He wanted to be heard. "She'd have found the medals excessive," he said. Zara laughed. "Sounds like she was smart."
Terrifying, he said. And the way he said it, soft, fond, slightly wrecked, told her everything about the man underneath the general. She was in trouble. She had known it since the restaurant. She had been telling herself it was manageable, containable, a thing that would end cleanly when her passport cleared. Standing in a Seoul market while this man held a ceramic bowl and talked about the smell of his mother's kitchen, Zara understood that she had been lying to herself. The press conference happened on day 5. Park Moo-jin had escalated, gone public with his inquiry in a statement to 3 major news outlets, naming Zara directly: foreign national, unexplained presence, ongoing investigation. The language was careful enough to avoid defamation. It was designed not to prove anything. It was designed to make Junho's name unsayable without hers attached. Junho's team called an emergency response. He would address the media. He would be brief, controlled, unambiguous. He did not tell Zara in advance. She found out the same way the rest of Seoul did, on her phone, a live notification. His face behind a podium, a cluster of microphones, the particular architecture of a powerful man answering questions he has chosen the terms of. She watched it on the small screen of her phone in the borrowed office on the 14th floor, Jisoo standing in the doorway pretending not to watch her watch it. The first question was about the investigation. He answered it precisely, dismissively, with the fluency of a man who has navigated bureaucratic attacks before. Fabrication. No basis. Legal team is responding. The second question was about the photograph. Junho looked at the journalist directly. "I attended the Kona Foundation Gala as I attend every year," he said. "I spoke with a number of guests throughout the evening. I don't recall the specific individual referenced in the photograph." The room on the screen was quiet. "I don't recall the specific individual." Zara watched the pixels of his face. Steady, unreadable, performing precisely what was required. She understood, somewhere underneath the thing happening in her chest, that this was the correct move, that his acknowledgement of her would deepen the narrative Park Moo-jin was building, that "I don't recall" was a shield.
Not a knife. She understood it completely. It still hit her like a door closing. She put her phone face down on the desk. Jisoo said, very quietly, "Mrs. Zara." "I'm fine," Zara said, voice steady. "Thank you, Jisoo." She opened her laptop. She found the document she'd been working on. She looked at the words on the screen and did not read them. "I don't recall the specific individual." She had agreed to this. Not in those words, not in that form, but she had agreed to the shape of it when she'd said, "When this is over, this ends here." She had known, from the grandmother in the market and the ceramic bowl and the smell of his mother's kitchen, that she had been lying about that too. But knowing you're lying to yourself and watching someone else confirm the lie with a microphone in front of cameras are 2 very different things. She closed her laptop. She went to the window. Seoul looked back at her, unhelpful. He came that evening. She had gone back to the hotel by then. She didn't want to be in his building, at his desk, under his arrangement when he arrived.
She wanted the 10 feet of neutral territory that a hotel room provided. He knocked. She opened the door. He looked at her, and she watched him understand, in the space of 2 seconds, that she had seen the press conference. Something passed across his face. Not guilt exactly, but the specific heaviness of a man who did something necessary that cost him more than he expected. "Come in," she said. He came in. She didn't offer him a seat, and he didn't take one. They stood in the small geography of the hotel room, the same space where this had started, where he'd told him 4 days, and she'd said, "When this is over, it ends." "You watched it," he said. "Everyone watched it." "Zara, I know why you did it." I hold his gaze. "I understand the strategy. I understand that acknowledging me feeds the narrative and feeds Park Mujin and potentially extends my situation here. I understand that I don't recall is a wall you built to protect me, not to erase me." I paused. "I understand all of it." He was very still. "And," he said. "And it's still..." She stopped, looked at the window, looked back.
It still felt like something. "It was the worst thing I've said in 12 years, he said quietly, "including things I've said in rooms you will never know about." The rawness of it, the directness, the complete absence of the composed, strategic, armored thing he showed the world, stopped her where she stood. "I built this life around being correct," he said, "around making the right move, the move that protects the most, costs the least, advances the position." He looked at her. "I have not made a single correct move since I saw you raise that paddle." Zara looked at him for a long moment. Then she crossed the room. She didn't think about Lagos or the sculpture, or the 3 days that had become 10. She didn't think about the photograph or the press conference, or the passport still flagged at the airport. She thought about the ceramic bowl, and the smell of ginger, and a man who hadn't stood still long enough to smell anything in 20 years. She put her hand against his chest. His breath stopped. "Tell me something true," she said. "Not strategy, not management. Something true." He looked down at her hand, then at her face. The stillness in him was different now. Not the practiced stillness of a man controlling a room, but the stillness of a man who has stopped running and doesn't know yet if the ground will hold him.
"I told my aide this morning to find out your flight path," he said. "Lagos, your neighborhood. I told him I needed to know if there were direct flights." Zara held very still. "That's not strategy," he said. "That's a man trying to figure out how to follow a woman to a city he's never smelled the rain in." The room was very quiet. Outside, Seoul pressed its lights against the window, 43 floors below where this had started, 2 days before she'd planned to leave, 8 impossible days after she'd arrived. She kissed him first. Not tentative. Zara had never been tentative. She kissed him like someone making a decision, deliberate and clear, and felt the exact moment he stopped calculating and kissed her back. His hands found her face, her shoulders, held her like a man holding something he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve. When they finally separated, his forehead dropped against hers, his breathing uneven. The general, the strategist, the man who didn't recall the specific individual, completely, irreversibly gone. "Lagos," she said softly. "Lagos," he agreed. And for the first time in 12 years, Cha Jun-ho made a plan that had nothing to do with war. Outside, in a car parked below the hotel, a phone screen glowed.
Park Moo-jin's operative scrolled through the latest intelligence. The passport delay was holding. The general was compromised. The woman was still here. He typed 2 words to his handler. She stays. He didn't know he was right for all the wrong reasons. He didn't know that the thing he'd engineered to destroy Cha Jun-ho had just become the thing that would finally make him whole. He didn't know that Zara Mensa, 3 days become 10, 10 days become something without a name yet, had already decided she was staying. Not because of a flagged passport, because of the rain in Lagos and a man who finally wanted to smell it. Besties, the general built walls for 12 years and she walked through every single one without even trying. But Park Moo-jin is not finished. And the hardest part of love isn't finding it. It's surviving what happens when your enemies find out you have it. Episode 2 is coming. Like, subscribe, and don't you dare miss it.